tomorrow. I hope that this body will work diligently, not only to have a conversation about the debt limit of America, but a conversation about how we take care of the underlying problem. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator's time has expired. The Senator from California.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Madam President, I understand that H.J. Res. 79 has been received from the House and is at the desk.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
H.J. Res. 79, making continuing appropriations for certain components of the Department of Homeland Security for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes.
Madam President, I ask for its second reading and object to my own request.
Objection having been heard, the bill will be read for a second time on the next legislative day.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn till 11 a.m. on Saturday, October 12, 2013, and that following the prayer and the pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, and the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and that the time until 12 noon be equally divided and controlled between two leaders or their designees.
Without objection.
And Madam President, at noon tomorrow, there will be a cloture vote on the motion to proceed to S-1569, the debt limit legislation. Madam President, if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order following the remarks of Senators Session and Blunt.
Without objection.
Madam President.
The Senator from Alabama.
Madam President, the Republican senators met with President Obama earlier today and discussed many of the financial issues facing America and the difficulties we are having in achieving an agreement that puts us on a sound financial path. There surely are actions that we can take together to improve our situation. I believe there was some progress made and some avenues for progress that could be opened up in the hours to come, and I hope that we can do that. But now it's well to recognize that our Medicare and Medicaid programs are surging in cost. And as the President rightly noted to us at our meeting earlier today, and he's done this for a number of years, he's noted that government health care costs are the biggest drivers of our debt. In other words, it's increasing at a faster rate than other programs, and we project it will continue to increase at those rates. And I think that's true. It is true. We have a huge challenge there. But importantly to this whole discussion, I would recall that the President, in a formal address to a joint session of Congress in September of 2009, promoting his Affordable Care Act, he stated this, that it would help fix this problem of growing cost of health care, and then flatly and unequivocally promised, quote, "I will not sign a plan that adds one dime to our deficits, either now or any time in the future, period," close quote. But this is astoundingly inaccurate, and we have to know this. We're voting on and wrestling on what to do about a health care bill, other spending programs, but one thing that's been overlooked is this promise that the health care bill, the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is not paid for as it was promised. And it's astoundingly over budget. let me talk to you a few minutes about this issue and its importance. And we work together to try to reach a compromise, we've got to understand that fact. And as we work to deal with some of our long-term financial challenges, we need to focus on that matter. Indeed, it appears, according to the Government Accountability Office, that over their long-term accounting period to evaluate the unfunded liabilities of the United States, that the Affordable Care Act will add $6.2 trillion to the unfunded liabilities of America. $6.2 trillion. That does not count the interest on that over this long period of time, which may well double that figure. And it puts it in the range, and maybe even more, almost equal to the liability of Social Security. So this is a big deal. And I want to share with my colleagues some thoughts as good faith negotiations are going on by members, and Republicans and Democrats are talking, and White House staff people are talking, and House members and the Speaker are talking. Some principles that need to be aware of as we go forward. So I'll make a budget warning and make this point. Trust fund improvements, Social Security and Medicare primarily, which are produced by savings or in these programs or increased revenues in these programs, and then a number of ideas have been floated that could do that, and they need to be done. But those savings through revenue or cutting of expenses cannot be used to justify or pay for breaking Budget Control Act caps. That's very important. So it's essential in these hours of financial debate that all members of Congress and that the American people understand that the savings gained from much-needed reforms of our financially unsound Social Security and Medicare trust funds can only be used to strengthen those funds and not be used simultaneously to support spending for a new program, such as the Affordable Care Act. You can't use the money twice. Our vital Social Security and Medicare programs are not solvent at this time. We know they're going into deficit right now, and when our revenues are increased for those programs, as many ideas are being floated, or cost of those programs are being brought down as ideas are being floated, and indeed a number of them are in the President's budget, which have some merit. The resulting funds can only be spent once. Only be spent once. The Budget Control Act restricts discretionary spending. It says we are not going to increase spending over a certain rate. We're going to reduce the rate of increase in government spending. And the Budget Control Act is in law. It was negotiated by the President and Senator Reid, the majority leader here, and the Speaker and Senator McConnell, and they agreed at certain limits on spending over the next 10 years. We were projected at that time to increase spending over 10 years, $10 trillion. If we're flat spending, we would spend $37 trillion. On the projected growth, it would go to $47 trillion. Under the Budget Control Act, we said, okay, we're going to cut spending, but really wasn't a cut in spending, but we would reduce spending, the growth of spending from $10 trillion to growing spending $8 trillion. And that's what the pain that you're hearing from so much of today. And Congress, in the 2 years plus since that agreement, except for a few budget gimmicks that my fine staff members bring up, for the most part, has largely stuck to those limits, though the President and the Democratic Senate have openly and directly opposed those limits. The President, 5 months after signing the Budget Control Act, submitted a budget to this Senate that would increase spending $1 trillion over the limits agreed to in the Budget Control Act. Can you imagine that? There's a bipartisan meeting as we worked on the debt ceiling, to raise the debt ceiling $2 trillion. We agreed that over 10 years we would cut spending $2.1 trillion. So 5, 6 months, less than 6 months later, the President submits a budget to the United States Senate and to the United States House that called for spending $1 trillion over that amount. So I think that was a breach, a serious act of the President to move away from the promises that he had made and the act he signed into law. Now, to be more specific about it, one of the proposals in the President's budget, and that's received a lot of discussion, is an alteration of the way we calculate inflation index for Social Security. It's been referred to as change CPI, and it's projected to save a certain amount of money, maybe $133 billion or maybe more. So let's just say it's going to save $100 billion. Change CPI. And it would, in fact, increase the revenue into Social Security, and it would reduce the amount of money that's paid out of Social Security. And it would save, let's say, $100 billion. So this would strengthen Social Security. There's no doubt about that. It would strengthen Social Security because the Social Security liabilities are going down and their revenue is going up. But what I want to say to our colleagues as they wrestle with how to bring our numbers into better balance, those savings cannot benefit Social Security and simultaneously justify increased Treasury spending over the Budget Control Act levels. You can't use the money twice. This is so basic. And we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. CBO, our Congressional Budget Office, has analyzed this kind of maneuver, and they've clearly affirmed that even though the budget score over 10 years, using the unified budget accounting methods, would suggest otherwise, you can't spend the money in both places. So if you know how to ask a question of CBO over the 10-year budget window, it can give the appearance that you have this money because it creates money, more money coming into the government, that you can spend it over here. But the money is dedicated to Social Security. It's Social Security money. It can't be spent twice. If it's going to strengthen Social Security, it can't be spent over here.
The Senator has used 10 minutes.
Madam President, I'm going to ask consent that I be given 5 additional minutes.
Without objection.
I thank the President most graciously. CBO has flatly called this, at a request, my request, in a letter, double counting. Can you imagine the Congressional Budget Office saying the United States Congress is double counting? Actually, at that case, in dealing with the Affordable Care Act, $500 billion of money extracted out of Medicare that was being used to claim it would pay for the Affordable Care Act when it was Medicare's money. So I'm talking at this point and just sharing the example from Social Security and the change CPI, but the principles are the same because both are trust funds. And so it is double accounting. In fact, any Social Security or Medicare trust fund savings so produced are legally assets of the trust fund, and debt instruments of the United States Treasury are issued, and interest paid from the U.S. Treasury to the Social Security and to the Medicare trust funds on the monies that are borrowed in that way. If the savings, as is likely, do not result in a trust fund surplus, then there's really even no surplus that they can borrow. It just simply tends to show more income to the U.S. Treasury. Falsely showing that because, again, the money is committed off budget to the Social Security. The critical fact is that all of those monies are already obligated to Social Security and Medicare and will be needed by those programs, and more money actually is going to be needed by those programs to meet the future obligations of those trust funds which are insolvent. They don't have enough money coming in to pay the obligations that they're required to make in the years to come. So the scope of this abuse of our accounting system is truly enormous and threatens our nation's very financial future. For example, it has allowed the President to falsely assert that the Affordable Care Act would not add one dime to the debt. When absent double counting, the Act will increase our debt by over $500 billion over the next 10 years alone. $500 billion. It's going to impact adversely the financial condition of America. The same accounting manipulations enable supporters of the Gang of Eight immigration bill to assert that their legislation was paid for. They're going to spend all this money and they were going to make us safe from illegal immigration, and it was all paid for, every dime of it, and it wouldn't add to the debt. You know how they did that? Well, they were going to give Social Security cards. The millions, 11 million or however many, would come forward illegally, and then they would pay more Social Security, and they would have more Social Security money coming into the U.S. Treasury, and therefore they said that would pay for the extra Border Patrol and other expenses that they said that they have to spend money on. But think about it, colleagues. The money paid for by the people who've been given legal status, the Social Security they paid for, is their money. It's their money. They're going to draw out every penny of it when they get older. You can't say it's available to pay another expense today. It's not going to be there, if you do, to pay for their Social Security when they retire. How simple is this? This was the message here on the floor. They insisted steadfastly that the bill was paid for, double counting Social Security money. So we've got to get straight about this, I got to say. Legislation must be adopted to stop this double accounting, and it's open to abuse and manipulation. It's been done, really, by both parties over the past, but not as much as we've seen lately, and not as much in the size of this. It's enabling, really, the nation's financial dangerous trajectory. Finally, as we work to end the nation's financial impasse, another warning is needed. All should understand that consent to passage of a continuing resolution or debt ceiling bill cannot be achieved until we have sufficient time to have an accurate CBO score of it so we know what kind of maneuvers are being used in the bill. So I'm going to object. We're not going to wake up one day and say we've got to run to the floor and pass a bill with 30 minutes notice or 3 hours notice, and that would be a mistake. Madam President, I thank the Chair and would yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Senator from Missouri.
I want to first of all follow up on a comment my friend from Alabama just made on Social Security and Medicare. I think it's very important that we listen carefully to what he just had to say, that if we do things that are so-called reforms, and I think there are many places where we could reform those programs, we should use those savings to save those programs. We shouldn't say we're going to have reforms in Medicare, more likely perhaps right away than Social Security, and then not use those reforms to extend the life of these important programs. These are programs that we have told Americans, in the case of Social Security since the mid-1930s, in the case of Medicare since the mid-1960s, that you'd be able to rely on. And we see that those programs can be extended, they can be adjusted, they can be reformed, But I think our leader on our side of the budget effort, who spends so much time trying to make the case for the right kind of budget decisions, is clearly pointing out that if you make savings in these programs and then use that money to fund other discretionary spending, is that the fair thing to do with Social Security or Medicare? I don't think so, and I think he's raising a very good point here. And as we try to figure out how to move forward in this year, we need to be sure that savings are real savings, that they're not double counted, that we're not saving money in one program that clearly should go toward that priority of that program rather than the other priorities we haven't yet set. Which gets me to the topic of setting priorities. You know, we had the opportunity to go to the White House, Democrats yesterday, Republicans today, to talk to the President about how we move forward with the budget year, the spending year that's already started. When we were there, the President made it clear once again that we shouldn't negotiate, but on more than one occasion in the morning that we were there, the President said we shouldn't be allowed to negotiate for things that you couldn't get or didn't get in the regular process. And my view of that, Madam President, is there is no regular process. As the President said that, I thought this is like pouring gas on a fire of frustration for members of the Senate, particularly in the House, that are frustrated that there is no process. There is no place earlier than a crisis to go and say, let's debate these issues, let's debate these priorities. How many of the 12 spending bills for the year that began 11 days ago have we had on the floor of the Senate? One. One of the bills that should have been done starting at about last March and April, that should have been completed over the summer, that money would have been spent beginning October 1. One of the 12 was on the floor, and frankly, it was a bill that the majority leader had every reason to believe wouldn't pass if it was brought to the floor. But let's not even go there. Let's assume it would have passed. It still would have just been one of the 12 bills that we need to run the government. So when the President or anybody else says you shouldn't use these crisis moments to try to get your priorities discussed, they're the only moments we have. They're the only time we have. I don't like government by crisis. I think it's a very unfortunate thing for this presidency that if you really look at how the government has worked in the last 5 years, it's from one crisis to another. And if I could do anything to help President Obama pull away from this crisis management, I'd be inclined to want to try to do that, particularly if pulling away from crisis management meant that we were going to come back and have a fair debate between a divided Congress that leads to some way forward that can actually accomplish something. The idea that we won't negotiate at this moment, or the President feeling that somehow he won't be held hostage to the debt limit, I'm certainly going to vote tomorrow not to even move forward with this discussion for a $1 trillion debt ceiling increase with no discussion of what we're going to do to change our behavior. You know, President Obama, to his credit, entered into a negotiation just 2 years ago, August of 2011, and in return for $2.5 trillion worth of spending cuts over a decade, he got $2.1 trillion in additional debt ceiling. Now, the President can't agree to that in August of 2011 and then in October of 2012 say nobody should ever negotiate on the debt ceiling. 53 times since 1978, we've had a change in the debt ceiling, and since 1978, more than half of those debt limits included legislation dealing with either spending or other matters. This is not, the President says, I will not put this on future presidents to be the president that goes forward with increasing the debt ceiling under some with a negotiation. Well, every president since 1978 has had the same situation the president had in August of 2011. The same situation, Madam President, you and I would have if we were going to go get our line of credit extended and we'd exceeded our line of credit. Whoever's going to extend that line of credit is going to say, okay, what are you going to do to change the behavior that you have that allowed you to blow through your last line of credit? And